soldier, storyteller, historian, hellraiser. It's Dave Carter, and this is The Dave Carter Show.
Alrighty, let's go.
Podcasting from Memphis, Tennessee. He's a soldier, storyteller, historian, and maybe a bit of a hellraiser. Click, listen, and enjoy. It's Dave Carter on the Ricochet Audio Network.
And we're locked and loaded and ready to go. Hey folks, I'm Dave Carter. I mean, can you imagine anyone else taking on the job of being me? I mean, who would want to in the first place? Anyway, it's a treat indeed to welcome you to the show today. Thank you for being here, for listening in and watching with us. We've been gone a little while. A lot has been going on behind the scenes, like, a day job, for example, paying the bills, that kind of thing. It's in retail, my day job, as you may know. The stimulus checks hit a couple, 3 weeks ago, and people are in an absolute panic to get rid of all that money that's in their accounts now. Unless they actually, save up a little bit in case something goes wrong at some point. We can't have that. So they're in a hurry to get rid of it so they can go back living paycheck to paycheck, teetering on the brink of financial disaster, which is good news for us retailers, right? So the store I work at, man, we have been as busy as a mosquito on a nude beach. I mean, that may not be the best analogy. In fact, that analogy kind of sucks, I guess, but then so does the mosquitoes. So anyway, you get the idea. But I think you'll find the wait here to have been worth it because Ricochet favorite and my favorite, Troy Senik, will be along with us in a little bit to talk about his latest adventure, which is actually an exciting initiative and a project in which he's recruited some of the best researchers and the best minds out there in an effort to explore some of the questions that nag at us every now and then, whether it be great big volcanos and the kind of damage they can do. They did a video even of the effect on crime of seemingly innocuous things like increasing street lighting in certain parts of town and what the impact that has on the crime rate. So it's not necessarily an ideological mission that they're on. They're just taking the things that we talk about around the water cooler or wherever and exploring it in depth and giving us information that, for the most part, a lot of us had no idea about. And then we get to decide from there what we think about it. But at least the research has been done. It's in compelling video, three or so minute video snips, and the film is unbelievable. The videography, the graphics, the narrations. Troy narrates some of this stuff, so it's really, really good. So we'll be getting into more of that with Troy here in just a minute. But speaking of retail, it's been my experience, and probably yours as well, that when you advertise a big sale, let's say a 50% off sale, Black Friday, just to take that as an example, you can anticipate when you do that a lot of people will be at the store, right? The place is going to be crowded on that particular day. If you work at a store, as I did, for example, where every New Year's Day they have dramatic reductions. There'll be a 40% reduction for example, in items that are already marked down 65%, so that you can walk out of the place with high-end merchandise at flea market prices. It's wonderful for the customer. And so you've incentivized them to maximize the power of their shopping dollar. They take advantage of that. So they show up in great big mobs. There's a stampede every New Year's Day when the door opens, and it's bedlam. It looks like the sacking of Rome all day long. When the crowd finally leaves, at the end of the day, the store is thoroughly pillaged. The employees are shell-shocked, and everyone, customer, employee alike, is utterly exhausted. But you know what doesn't happen? Absolutely no one in the store, not customer, not employee, not manager, none of them look around and say, gee whiz, I didn't expect all that to happen. Because it was absolutely predictable. You knew that when you put this thing together, right? And yet that's exactly what's happening on America's southern border. The feds picked up, just in the month of March, 19,000 unaccompanied children traveling across the Mexican border into the U.S., just in the month of March alone. An all-time record, roughly double the number of children that came across a year earlier in March of 2020. Overall, the Border Patrol encountered nearly 170,000 people entering the U.S. illegally just during the month of March. And they've run out of space to house them. So a great many of them are now being transported to different venues in various cities, military bases, hotels, on your dime, of course. But they were kept in such cramped quarters for so long. Now they're being dispersed about, and God knows how many of them are taking COVID-19 with them, for example, while the rest of us are being locked down and made to wear face masks and all that kind of thing. Meanwhile, Vice President Harris has been placed in charge of this fiasco, an utterly predictable one, and she has evidently been mute ever since. Not a bad thing, actually. And then the border czar, Roberta Jacobson, I believe her name is, said, nope, done. She's out of here. She's had enough fun. She's walking out the door. No more for her. Who could have seen this coming, right? Actually, anyone who has enough sense to lock their doors at night could have seen this coming. When you come into office vowing to stop construction on a border wall because it's inhumane, don't you see, you effectively leave the door unlocked, if you will, and then you reverse the policies that required those applying for asylum here to stay in Mexico pending the adjudication of their case. When you tell these folks they'll be welcomed into the country, there will be jobs and free education and free benefits and free health care and all kinds of nice things, what exactly do you think is going to happen? That which you subsidize, you get more of. I mean, Ray Charles could have seen this coming. And yet, the folks who claim to know best how to order our lives and spend our income, our earnings, and because they are so much smarter than the rest of us, don't you know, have been caught flat-footed. They are positively dumbstruck as to how to handle a humanitarian crisis which they created. Did you see the video of those two children that were just literally dropped, practically thrown over the wall into the U.S., two small children? Or the video of the Border Patrol guy who encountered a youngster just last week, I believe it was, who was here all alone, by himself in the desert, no one to help, not knowing what was going on, crying his eyes out. Or it was a week or so ago, I believe, that we had a small child, 8 years old, I believe, drowned in the Rio Grande trying to get over here. Family's back home. They dispatched the kid. When the guy who sits in the office that used to be occupied by leaders of the free world rolls out the welcome mat to everyone, don't be surprised if everyone, including a few terrorists, come over. It doesn't surprise me. In fact, none of it surprises me because it's so predictable that I predicted it. What does surprise me, what just dumbfounds me, are the Americans who cheered when this administration came into power, who now have grown as silent as statues while all this is happening. They lose their voice. They forget how to applaud when their accomplishments happen. Come on, folks, all the devotees of the high church of wokeness and cultural suicide, take credit where you've earned it, where it's due. Is that not what they wanted? They knew it was coming because a lot of people told them what would happen, and still they persisted out of their hatred for one man. So I think a curtain call is in order. Take a bow, and while they're taking a bow, stay in that position for a while longer because a lot more is coming our way, so to speak. The Senate filibuster hangs by the skin of Joe Manchin's teeth, and with it the rights of legislative minorities. The administration has begun the process by which they intend to pack the Supreme Court with as many justices as it takes to assure a progressive hegemony and the destruction of the separation of powers. And the sanctions that had crippled Iran and kept them in line for a while are being lifted, of course. And after months of standing down while your cities, your businesses were being torched and looted and innocent people were being dragged out of their vehicles and beaten senseless, after months of defunding and demoralizing the police, which resulted in more innocent blood being shed with skyrocketing homicide rates and assaults, the same people that left you vulnerable to all of that, who couldn't be bothered to protect you, are now going to make it even harder for you to protect yourself. Because that's what happens when you go from America first to Americans last. But hey, there's no mean tweets being twittered out of the White House, so it's all good, right? All the mayhem, the streets full of chaos, the chaos on the border, tens of thousands of jobs already lost, the million more jobs predicted to be lost as Joe Biden's tax increases take effect. With Americans losing their jobs while people who are here illegally claim benefits that you get stuck with the bill for, it's all worth it, right? Way to go. Take a bow. But don't worry about claiming your prize, because your prize is going to claim you. And the rest of us, our kids, our grandkids, will all suffer a loss of liberty, dignity, and in many instances, their very lives to the rule of incompetent, totalitarian little misfits who have this stupid audacity to presume to order you around like you were born with a ring through your nose, made to be led, made to be ruled. And judging from the election results, I guess enough of you apparently fit that description to tank the place. See, this is why I don't dwell on this too much normally when I do a podcast, because I get too irritated about it, and I probably shouldn't, but I'm passionate about the country which multiple generations of my family served in the military to defend, and which I spent 20 years defending. I'm not too keen to see it administer a self-lobotomy and implode. But here we are. So let's just chalk it up to a momentary candor on my part, to borrow a phrase from Steven Tyler, to tap dancing on a landmine. But we'll turn down the temperature here a little bit and turn up the fun as we cool things off a little and relax and enjoy a much-needed conversation with a really, really good guest. Now, if you don't know Troy Senik, then here, let me read the bio that I found on his new website, Kite and Key Media. It says, quote, Troy Senik is the co-founder and vice president for content at Kite and Key Media. He's been a White House speechwriter, a think tank executive, a newspaper columnist, a podcaster, and a Jeopardy champion. He is currently at work on a biography of President Grover Cleveland, meaning that he will soon be able to add Guest on C-SPAN 3 to his list of accolades. That book he's working on, by the way, if I have it correct, is called A Man of Iron, The Turbulent Life and Improbable Presidency of Grover Cleveland. Now, if you haven't noticed, Troy can be wonderfully self-deprecating at times, charmingly so, but he has a wonderful gift for eloquence, which he's used to help others, including President George W. Bush, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Newt Gingrich, and a whole host of writers at the Manhattan Institute and also at Ricochet when he was our editor-in-chief there, even helping yours truly here. He hosts several podcasts on Ricochet and over at the Hoover Institute, and those shows feature distinguished scholars, historians, accomplished academics. And then he obviously got drunk and ended up here today talking with me. So, Troy, cheers.
Dave, good to see you again, my friend. That is an incredibly unfair introduction because I'm going to do nothing but disappoint.
Right, I just don't
see. Generous.
I don't see that happening. Not in the least. And if so, we'll switch over to C-SPAN, right? So, but thank you for taking the time to appear on the program,
course.
And hopefully you'll leave here with your reputation at least somewhat intact.
What reputation? Yeah, it's not going to take much.
My mom-in-law and Shelley, of course, in their regards.
Likewise,
they know I'm talking to you, and they're all jealous. So you left the Manhattan Institute a little while back. Now, are you still living in the Seventh Circle of Dante? I mean, are you still living in the New York area?
I am. It's gotten worse, Dave. It's gotten worse because, as you know, I was in your adopted home state of Tennessee before I came.
Right, I remember that. I didn't think you would leave. I don't mean that as a bad thing. I thought,
I didn't intend to. I was very happy being in Nashville, and then I got this unexpected sort of offer out of the blue from the Manhattan Institute back in 2015, and tried to see if there was a way that I could work it remotely, and there was just no way to because I was managing all the scholars. It just wasn't a thing that you could do from your basement in a bathrobe, which is how I would have been doing it. So I came up here, but
ahead of your time.
allergic that I lived on 40 acres in the woods in Nashville. So the last thing that I was going to do was come to Midtown Manhattan. So I lived about as far out as you can in Connecticut and commuted. Now, Dave, even though I'm no longer at the Manhattan Institute, not only am I still in the greater New York area, I have managed to make it much worse for myself, which is I live in a high-rise in New Jersey.
Oh,
so this is devolution.
So you really are drunk. Okay. Wow.
I feel a little liberated, though, because when I was at the Manhattan Institute, the history of the Institute is so wound up with the history of New York City and the work that they did with Giuliani on crime and all this work they continue to do on New York. So if you were at the Institute, you know, you always had to reflect on the majesty of New York City and how important the work was. And now that I'm out of it, I feel free to say, God, it's a nightmare. Like I really kind of hate it here. So I don't think I'm here for the long term, but alas, I am still in the New York area.
When Shelley and I were dating and I was still driving 18-wheelers across the country, I had to go from northern Connecticut down through New York City and on further south. And in an 18-wheeler, I mean, it's just a nightmare to drive, to take 95 and do that whole deal over the bridge and GW Bridge and all that stuff. And I was going to say a little Catholic prayer because I was in the middle of converting to Catholicism, so I want to get this right. And I could not remember, you know, what saint controls traffic. I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. So I'm like, calling all saints, get me through this place, you know. So, yeah. Well, now with Kite and Key Media, you found a niche, it seems, in the national conversation that really, I think, needed some attention. You guys focus on the sort of questions that we all ask ourselves, right? The things that we're curious about and talk to each other about. And you've got a great group of researchers there. So tell me, if you will, please, from your perspective, how would you describe the mission of Kite and Key and what it's primarily focused on?
It was sort of motivated by my experience at the Manhattan Institute and with other think tanks. As you mentioned, I've worked with the Hoover Institution too, because think tanks are very good at reaching elite audiences. They're very good at getting to policymakers, members of Congress, getting stuff on the opinion page of the Wall Street Journal. Those were the things that we would count as victories when I was at the Manhattan Institute.
Right.
And they felt good. But then I would go home and I'd talk to my family members or my friends, people who weren't sort of immersed in this world. And you'd realize that whatever they had seen on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube had much more influence than they never picked up the Wall Street Journal, you know. And then when you looked at the content that existed in those places on the online platforms, the kinds of things that they were consuming, they're so brutally oversimplified, or they operate from such erroneous suppositions that you just feel like, God, you know, there's a lot of people who are consuming a lot of media thinking that it's making them smarter, and it's probably they would have been better off consuming nothing. And it used to be that these sort of elite institutions, whether they were the think tanks or to some degree the academy, this stuff would kind of bleed down into broadcast media or print media, and you'd get a sort of oversimplified but still functionally correct version of it. And then there'd be sort of the next level where it went down to the grassroots. It's kind of like a Xerox of a Xerox.
Sure.
Every layer, you'd lose some precision, but people would still have a good understanding of policy topics, and we just felt like it had gone away. So our idea was you can't actually do this. You can't try to educate the public directly from a think tank, because think tanks are full of PhDs who are just going to get in their own way when they're trying to explain something to someone in a diner.
Right, yeah.
So my background, having been a speechwriter, having been a columnist, having been somebody whose entire life has been about trying to simplify and make things clear, we thought, let's just cut out the middleman and let's just take all this great research that's being done in think tanks or academic institutions, wrap it up and synthesize it for a general audience, and try to do it in a way that's visually arresting, that's kind of sort of a magazine style, and try to do it with a sense of humor. And I mean, I call it the pill pocket approach, right? If you got a dog and you got to give him the pill, you put it in the little thing, so this is not supposed to feel burdensome or like you're watching a documentary. They're 5 to 7 minute videos that we hope, they're, I think, necessary to get people to understand these issues. Not sufficient. We'd love if people went back and actually read the underlying material.
Yeah.
But if you're only going to give 5 minutes to the kinds of issues we do, we hope we can get you started on it.
Okay. Well, I think it's a marvelous success so far. Now, you're the co-founder of Kite and Key. And vice president for content. The other co-founder, Vanessa Mendoza, also has had a distinguished career leading public policy research efforts. She's co-founder and CEO. So she must be a wonderful partner because she gave you the better end of the deal. Vice president for content. Actually, it does sound like a lot of fun. Is it as fun as it sounds?
Oh, it's a ton of fun. I mean, what it basically comes down to is the division of labor is she handles all of the business stuff, which she's fantastic at. So we work together at the Manhattan Institute. She used to be the executive vice president of the Manhattan Institute.
Okay.
And we're a nonprofit, so she does most of the fundraising. She does all the strategic planning. She oversees all the marketing. I get to sit around and think, what could we write about today? I get to sit around and, because there are not enough people supervising me, get to say, what if we did a video about super volcanoes? And there's no one really there to say no to me, Dave. I mean, this is an extraordinary and frankly reckless amount of power to give someone like me.
I agree, but I think it's a great. I think it so far, whatever you're drinking, keep drinking it because it's working out.
Keeping the lid on.
Yeah, right. I've got some good Cajun coffee here. Now, this is a different mug.
In a hell of a mug.
Yeah.
What does that say?
It says more coffee, less commies. If we were being grammatically correct, it would be fewer commies, but screw it. It's just, this is good chicory coffee. So to put hair on your teeth, and it's good for you. When I stop stirring it, the spoon just ends up straight in the cup. As you just tear off a slice and all. It's great stuff. Now, I did a little reading up on you. And I can't.
What do you mean you did a little reading up on me? How long have I known you, Dave? What reading up?
When did you just recently find out what Air Force base I retired from? So these things eke out over time, right?
That's a good.
So I came across a 2018 interview in which you talked about the role of a presidential speechwriter, and you said that they, quote, must be able to distill complicated ideas into short, pithy, and intelligible formulations for people who just don't have enough time to go deeper. So it seems like Kite and Key becomes a realization of that whole train of thought that you had going back then. Is that fair?
It's fair. It's been gestating for a long time. I'll give you a version of this. Just occurred to me when you said it. When I first came on at the White House, if you're the low man on the totem pole on the speechwriting team, one of the things you always get assigned, or at least you did in my day, was the president's weekly radio address, which is this short thing that came out every Saturday. Usually it was sort of derivative of something that he had done during the week. So you're kind of synthesizing someone else's work.
That was really cool stuff, too. I mean, Ronald Reagan had some. Yeah, I remember all that.
Yeah. I mean, well, in its heyday, it really meant something.
Right.
By the time I was there, it was kind of a tertiary priority.
Right.
But I remember saying at the end of the Bush administration, this, if you recall, 07, 08, there's this well, you would recall because you were probably driving. There's this huge spike in gas prices.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And the issue on the table at the time was Anwar was opening up Anwar.
Okay.
And I said to somebody on the communication staff, I said, we could accomplish so much more if we did these in a video format. So we could actually show the specifics of, because Anwar, people have in their mind's eye, they have this abstract vision of caribou frolicking on a meadow. And
yeah, right.
God forbid that we intrude. When in reality, I mean, the point that George Will always used to make is Anwar is the size of the state of South Carolina, and the area that they wanted to drill is about the size of Logan Airport in Boston. And I remember saying to somebody, if we could show this to people, it would totally change this debate. So even going back that far, there was this idea that if we can do it in sort of a concise fashion, if we can use the visuals to kind of make this stuff clearer. They never listened to me. By the way, the Obama administration came in and did precisely that thing. They turned it into a video series.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. They did a few things that make, not many, but they did a few things that make sense. Well, look, what I want to do with your kind indulgence, I'm going to play a segment for our folks here. Of one of the videos that you guys did. This one is on the subject of volcanoes. So everyone is thinking, hold up, it's not marginal tax rate reductions. This is interesting stuff, right? So, so we'll do a little video on that if that's okay.
Yes.
All I've got to do is hit about 16 buttons simultaneously.
You can do it, Dave. I believe in you.
All right.
Volcanoes have played a dramatic role in human history. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius destroyed Pompeii. The eruption of Krakatoa in 1883 was so violent that the sound could be heard 3,000 miles away, the equivalent of hearing something happening in Dublin, Ireland, from Boston. In 1980, Americans even got their own taste of volcanic destruction with the eruption of Mount St. Helens. But there's one thing humans have never encountered, at least not since we've been keeping historical records: the eruption of a supervolcano. What is a supervolcano? Put simply, it's a flaming death hole. Put slightly less simply, it's a volcano capable of eruptions on a scale we can barely imagine. A supervolcanic explosion would be at least 4,000 times as powerful as the eruption at Mount St. Helens, and could wreak havoc across the entire planet.
So that's uplifting.
Well, the goal was not to be uplifting. The goal was to responsibly scare people.
Okay, that's good. Congratulations. I mean, the video work, it's outstanding. I mean, if you call it filmography, whatever the proper name for it is, I mean, it grabs you and just draws you into what's going on. You're narrating that one wonderfully. And so it's a good, pithy, informative way, as you say, of wondering if the planet is going to become a flaming death hole. It's catchy.
I want you to know, I fought very hard for that line. I fought very, very hard for the sort of Norse metal visual that's behind it and the crunchy guitar underneath it. These are the things that make my work worth doing. That, and then we had a minerals video earlier on where I fought very hard for. We photoshopped an old Maoist poster with because the underlying line was about how China was never going to relax, that laid back dictatorships aren't a thing, and so we photoshopped an old Maoist propaganda poster with the slogan "Dance like nobody's watching." And I mean, these are the things that define my life now, Dave.
Well, if you will permit me, then, with immense respect, of course, but I would offer one word of caution here.
Yes.
Because when you put this sort of thing together, you never know when someone with, a twisted mind and a soundboard or something of that order can take just add one little tone, right? And the next thing you know, you've got a
flaming hole.
So you've got to be really, really.
Well,
right now, Troy is thinking, did I agree to do this?
Well, I enjoyed the Cajun cuisine, you and yours, so I've had this experience.
Troy's thinking, I worked in the White House, damn it, and here I am talking about
flaming hole.
We now return you to C-SPAN 3 and book notes already in progress.
I'm just honored that you think this is less dignified than working in the White House. You'd be surprised.
Okay, I'm going to try to be somewhat serious, but one of the things that I've noticed, one of the things that I've noticed about you and that I admire, in addition to the masochistic streak that brought you here today, is you correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that you prefer to stay a few steps back from the outrage du jour, right? And that you want to find ways to engage the mind, but you're really not interested in the polemical fisticuffs and free-for-all that yes, Lord? Anyway, that dominates.
That's right. I should stipulate I'm not interested in being on the supply side of that market. Doesn't mean that I'm not on the demand side sometimes.
Yeah, okay, sure.
I do enjoy some people who engage in that. But in my heart of hearts, I think this is an untenable position, unfortunately, in the year 2021. But in my heart of hearts, am a culture war pacifist. Okay. Most of the things that occupy our attention in the culture war, I tend to think would be things that would be better solved in people's communities or on an individual basis. The problem with that, of course, is if one side doesn't agree to those terms. This actually much like the problem with real pacifism. You're going to get
eventually
get rolled over.
You may not be interested in them, but they're interested in you, right? Yeah.
Exactly right. But because so much of American politics, I think, has shifted to a focus on these cultural issues, the sort of bread and butter stuff that we're talking about at Kite and Key sort of takes a back seat. And I think we're actually losing the muscle to have – the layperson is losing the muscle to have serious arguments about that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the idea with Kite and Key was to build that muscle back up, but also to – I mean, we're not trying to hide who we are. We came from the Manhattan Institute. We're right-of-center people. We're not trying to hedge on any of that.
Right.
But in doing videos about public policy and public policy issues, I really go out of my way. We go out of our way to – like, we don't feature politicians in these videos as either objects of ridicule or objects of praise. We really don't talk about Republicans or Democrats, conservatives or liberals, because I want people to focus on the ideas before they start trying to label them, especially with people who have kind of soft priors.
Well, yeah, and when they hear a label, they automatically attach all sorts of attributes to that person that has that label that may or may not be accurate. And in many cases, they're not at all accurate.
That's sort of my thing. I don't want to give people the excuse to take the shortcut. I want them to actually think through it on the merits.
Yeah. My grandfather, my dad's side, was a Democrat from the time the earth cooled, I guess. And so, and he and I mean, during the Reagan presidency, he and I would go round and round and round. He couldn't figure out where my folks had gone wrong in my upbringing because I wasn't. And so what I did is I would say, all right, Grandpa, let me just ask you some questions. We don't even talk about political parties anymore. And I would ask him topic A, topic B, topic C. And he would tell me what he thought. I said, you've just espoused the Republican platform, essentially. And he looked at me like, you bastard. He was not happy. But when you get down to the ideas, that's what matters, right?
Yes. Yeah, and he's representative of an entire generation of Southern Democrats, where you had the opposite thing happening with Northeastern Republicans too. Right. I mean, I think we've actually, in a weird way, we've lost something by the parties becoming more consistent. They were a little more interesting, and there was a little bit more play in the joints, even legislatively, when there was more ideological diversity within the parties. I think it does make it harder when they're more intellectually consistent. They kind of make more sense.
They've purged. If I may be too blunt, but Democrats, particularly, if you in any way become somewhat pro-life, if that's think about that and things in those terms. No, there's no place for you here.
It's funny you bring that up. I was trying to think the other day if there are any prominent, and by prominent I mean like they could be a House member, any prominent pro-life Democrats left anywhere in the country.
I don't think so.
I can't really think of one.
Not since Zell Miller died, I don't believe.
Yeah. Who was I'm forgetting his name now, the congressman from Michigan during the Obamacare fight that was pushing on this. It was a pro-life Democrat.
I cannot remember.
Maybe it was Bart Stupak. That's the last one I remember. I don't think there are any.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you're right. So there's a reason why I guess those labels come attached with all these preconceived ideas, because the parties have made that happen. So talk about ideas.
Yeah, and there's also a focus in the work that we do on finding some issues that I'd almost call pre-ideological. Like I don't think that there is a Republican or Democratic approach to how you think about the long-term threats of something like a
flaming death hole. Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I mean, we did one on the future of cash, because there are proposals out there to abolish the use of actual hard currency in the future. That hasn't really broken along partisan lines yet. So we're going to keep trying to do those things, because I like to get to issues where people their synapses aren't already wired a certain way.
And bringing in the perspective of Aretha Franklin, that was fantastic.
Thank you, I appreciate
that.
Yeah,
awesome.
We used Aretha Franklin in the opening because Aretha Franklin always wanted to be paid in cash. And the reason that Aretha Franklin always wanted to be paid in cash was when she was younger.
Right.
There are tons of black musicians who'd get stood up. They'd do the show and they wouldn't get the money.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to underscore the point that, boy, having it in your hand makes a difference.
Yep. There's something called common sense. There's something called good sense, and she had good sense. So,
and frankly, I just wanted an excuse to put Aretha Franklin in a
who can deny that? Who can at all? Okay, so changing gears very quickly. How the Grover Cleveland book? How's that coming? You remember him? He was a.
Dave. I mean, I will say two things.
Yeah.
One, I think it's coming pretty well. Two, about a year ago, I had, much to my chagrin, an extremely intense bout with an extremely bad kidney stone, and I would compare writing my first book to that experience. It will pass eventually.
Wow.
It's going to be extremely painful in the process, and I might black out at some point before it's done.
I don't know if you remember. You were our editor-in-chief at the time when I was hospitalized for some kidney stone issues.
Oh, I remember it. I remember it very well.
Yeah, you say that. I mean, it starts hurting right away. As soon as, oh my God! If you compare writing a book, that particular book, to that, of course,
it is funny.
Make it for a catchy title.
I don't know if you've found this, but after I went through my experience, quite traumatic, I found that amongst men, it seems like second only to being a combat veteran in the amount of immediate esprit de corps. Like if you mention it, every guy who's ever gone through it will reflexively wince and then immediately want to tell you their story. In fact, I have to tell you something. This is so fantastic. So I do this show with Victor Davis Hanson.
Yeah.
Victor has been through this many times.
Oh, okay.
And Victor, as soon as he found out, this will tell you a lot about Victor Davis Hanson as a person. Victor immediately started walking me through all the things that he recommended as to what to do and what not to do. As soon as we got off of our podcast that day, he sent me a 15-paragraph email walking me through everything I know. He's a lovely guy, but also this is just you immediately feel a sympathy in your bones for somebody who's gone through
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, mine ended up having to have a surgery to take care of. So I remember. Oh my gosh. I won't share the. Golly, I brought back memories there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take the show in that direction. But that is the analogy that comes to mind. I'm very close to finishing this book. And I have to tell you, the interesting thing about this book is it's totally serendipitous. This is a thing that I've been obsessed with for 10 or 15 years. I've always thought there needs to be a modern revisitation of Grover Cleveland. Mm. He's one of the only two-term presidents that is not sort of fixed in the public's memory. Right. If you go and think about the people who have actually served 2 full terms, work almost on first-name bases with most of them, the exceptions being Cleveland and maybe James Monroe. Anyway, this was a thing in the back of my head. It was a thing I never pursued. And it just so happened that a couple of friends of mine who are agents, who are literary agents in D.C., were in New York when I was still at the Manhattan Institute and stopped by just on a social call. Mm-hmm. And in trying to learn about their business, I asked them, how they go about finding projects, how they go about finding authors. And they said, well, every now and again, we take something from a publisher on spec. They just have something they want, and they don't know who the author to do it is. And their example of one of these that was so ludicrous that they could never find anybody was Simon & Schuster wants a book on Grover Cleveland. Where the hell are we going to find that first? At which point I said, gentlemen.
I got an idea for you.
You have come to the right place.
Right. Well, I mean,
literally fell into my lap.
Well, you just got to push through, then, right? Just like you would with the kidney stone. You got to push through because I want to say it, but
well, around this time next year, that is when it is due to be hitting stands. Partially because they want to get it out before the field starts congealing for the Republican presidential contest, right. Because Donald Trump, God bless him, the prospect of him running again is the only thing able to push Grover Cleveland back into public consciousness.
Well, there we are. Yeah. So very, very quickly, how's the family?
The family is great. My wife finished right before COVID started, finished a PhD at the University of Connecticut in biomedical sciences.
Nice. She's
now working at Bristol Myers Squibb in New Jersey. So she's the brains in the family. I mean, I'm just obviously you would know this by looking at me. I'm arm candy. That's what I'm here.
You too. I mean, the things that we do, suffer and go through for our spouses. It's just. Remember, I told you earlier about Shelley and her eyes just like that. Yes. Right now she sees this, she's going, "Oh God, there he goes." No. Well, look, this has been mad fun.
It always is, Dave. It always is when I'm talking to
you. I hope that you can still find gainful employment after this goes public. And
it's an open question whether I have gainful employment.
It's been a treat, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I do appreciate it.
Likewise, Dave. Thank you very much.
Folks, that's Troy Senik on the Dave Carter program. We're talking with Ricochet co-founder and Cheers executive producer Rob Long. I used to say when I lived in the Panhandle of Florida, I used to say that the further south that you went in Florida, the further north you go.
That's true. That's exactly right.
The accents change, the driving habits change. Oh my God, it's like anyway.
My grandfather was a Bostonian, and then spent most of his life sort of living abroad in kind of crazy places in Africa and Mexico, and he was living in the 1950s and 60s in Paris, and he was doing mining in Africa, in French equatorial Africa, and people, when he would drive in Paris, and people said, "My God, I mean, how did you learn to drive so well in Paris?" And he goes, "I learned to drive in Boston."
If your speakers are making a funny sound, you're listening to the Dave Carter Show.
Speaking of the Panhandle, just to go back to that, what happens when people in New York and in California discover how beautiful the Panhandle is?
Don't.
Yeah.
No. But no, because when I get out of Mogadishu, Memphis over here, I'm more likely than not going to be in the Panhandle. No, please, I'm going to edit that part out.
Okay.
Dave Carter.
Let me tell you something now. When the time comes, I'm going to be out of here so fast it's going to make my head spin. Enough fun, man. So how'd you like Troy Senik? Wasn't he great? Normally, on these various other programs and podcasts on which he appears, he plays it pretty straight, which makes sense when you're talking with brilliant legal minds like Richard Epstein and John Yoo, or with Professor Victor Davis Hanson, who is arguably one of the smartest men in the country. So when Troy comes over here, well, it's a little bit of a different vibe. And so we encourage Mr. Senik to let his hair down, if not his guard, and have a fun time. But he's really doing fantastic work along with Kite and Key co-founder and CEO Vanessa Mendoza and their superb team of researchers and producers over there at Kite and Key to give us all a lot of information to consider as we look at some of the major issues that affect all of us, regardless of your ideological disposition, whether you're a Bernie Sanders utopian or some fire-breathing nut like me. It affects us all, and they give us the information to think about. So if you've enjoyed the exchange thus far, I would encourage you to head on over to Ricochet Audio Network and enjoy the things that we have for your consumption there, from Troy's programs to Commentary Magazine's podcast, and my friend Nick Plosser and his show called the 50% Podcast, where he interviews veterans and active duty folks to give you a sense of what is being done on your behalf by members of our armed forces. And of course, the Ricochet Flagship Podcast keeps humming along each week with Peter Robinson and Rob Long and James Lilacs as they engage some of the most interesting and knowledgeable people in the news today. So if you want to pony up, say, $4.50 a month, you can listen to all the podcasts, you can read the articles on the main feed and on the member feed behind the paywall, and you can comment on everything that's there. If you chip in just 50 cents more per month, then you can write your own articles for the whole wide world to see what you think about things. But if you're not sure that you want to make that commitment yet, just want to try this thing out for a while and see what it's about, then I've got a deal for you. For listeners to the Dave Carter program, you can drag your cursor on up to the top of the screen and type in ricochet.com/gumbo, Gumbo. You'll get a free 30-day trial of Ricochet. Try it out, see what you think about it, write, comment, read, do your own articles, and if you like it, well then $4.50 per month gets you in the door. So take that and stick it in your situation. Give it some thought. You ever had any good gumbo, by the way? Man, I could use some. I'm making myself homesick, but yeah, I could use it. Anyway, that means nothing. Just go on over to ricochet.com/gumbo, Gumbo, and you can join the conversation.
Newsmakers, celebrities, authors, pundits, and normal people too. All here, all on the Dave Carter Show.
So this is the part of the program where I get to talk with Ricochet members and bask in their wisdom and insight. And this edition of the member segment is no exception. at all. Now, remember, folks, if you take advantage of my offer by going to ricochet.com/gumbo, becoming part of Ricochet, you could very well find yourself right here on the podcast as well. Now, tell me if you've heard this before, okay? Things have gone absolutely bat guano insane in the Minneapolis area. That's a shock, isn't it? And another person has resisted arrest, and surprise, bad things followed. At which point, cue the rioters, the mayhem, the looting, the arson, the destruction, because nothing says we want justice like stealing flat-screen TVs and setting businesses and things on fire. But there are different layers to the story, and as I often do, I try to talk with folks on the ground when these significant events take place. And my go-to person in Minneapolis, as many of you know, is Ricochet member and a writer at the Federalist, Jenna Stocker. Jenna's a Marine Corps veteran where she served as an officer. She was a researcher at the Center for Security Policy, a think tank in Washington, D.C., and she now resides in Minneapolis with her husband, who's also a military veteran. They're both outnumbered by a number of dogs. I've had that in my notes here. But at least the dogs are domesticated, which is more than one can say about the mob that's determined to wreck the city. So with that backdrop, I'm happy to welcome again to the program Jenna Stocker, though I regret the circumstances. How are you?
Good. And yourself, Dave?
I'm just having all sorts of fun here, enjoying this, and I've got the coffee going. But I hate what I'm seeing on the TV. Now, I know that the TV has a lot of what you see on TV is just the tunnel vision, if you will. It doesn't show the larger landscape. But I know that also that what's happening in Minneapolis is happening with the backdrop of the Derek Chauvin case. And I believe the National Guard's been brought in and police presence has been beefed up. So talking about, again, the tunnel vision that the camera gives, the larger landscape that's out there. With that in mind, what's your impression? Because you live there. You've lived there all your life, pretty much, I believe.
Yep, born and raised.
So what do you make of all this, just from a macro point of view?
I think the trial itself, the Chauvin trial, is definitely having a tangible effect on people's mindset. It's pretty tense. All the local news stations are running live stream. The arguments have ended yesterday, and the jury has a day off today, and I think they're going to start deliberations on Monday, if I have that timeline right. Yep. So, that's kind of this is kind of going to be what people have been holding their breath about. I think a lot of people have their minds made up. At least the activists have their minds made up of what they want to see and expect nothing less unless there's going to be violence.
Well, they had their minds made up before there was ever a trial.
Absolutely.
The evidence is not necessarily needed after a certain point. They just, in their opinion, they see what they see, and there's nothing else that matters. Two-part question. To what extent has all the unrest and the looting and the carnage and all that, to what extent has that all damaged the city's reputation as a safe place to live and work and attract businesses, for example?
I think it's going to be a long time before Minneapolis makes its way back to even approaching where it had its maximum potential, I think, before all this started, before the pandemic, I would say. There was a few officer-related shootings, before then. Flynn de Castile was one. Right. And they had, but after this, crime has only escalated, especially violent crime in the city. So you're kind of perpetuating a feeling of mistrust between the people on the street and the police officers. They're pretty combative. So, and then after the George Floyd death, there was feeling where cops are just not welcome here
until they're needed.
Mindset. Exactly. Yes.
When they're needed, they're supposed to be there. We don't defund you right now. Come on back because we need help right now because this guy's trying to kill us. But after that, you're defunded again. So it's tough for the cops to adjust to this kind of mentality.
Well, there was an immediate call for just absolute defunding of the police.
Right.
Ilhan Omar is a rep for that area, and so she was out there with her bullhorn calling for that, along with a Black Lives Matter crowd.
Right.
So and it kind of they had to backstep that with a triple-digit spike in percentage of violent crime, carjackings, especially when juveniles, has increased. Police are having to turn to more of a reactionary instead of a proactive type of policing, which it's not making the city any safer.
No, proactive policing is what helps keep these things from boiling to the surface in the first place and keeps these neighborhoods safer than they would otherwise be, than if all you're doing is responding to calls. Which brings me to my second part of the question I was posing. Do you think that the city will ever come back as a vibrant place to settle down, or is everyone that can pretty much voting with their feet at this point?
Yeah, I think the people that can leave or have seen the writing on the wall have left or make plans to find other places, in the suburbs even. Remote work has made that a lot easier. Target has made plans. They're going to keep people away. They're leaving their headquarters in downtown, which is already a ghost town because of the pandemic. So, all you really have left in the downtown area are homeless people and drug addicts and mentally unstable and mentally ill people.
But enough about local government.
Yeah. So, and it's not just people that are leaving, but it's people that maybe could be attracted to Minneapolis as a destination point. We're talking about major sporting events, political events that are just going to completely bypass the cities and go somewhere more or less hostile to tourists. So it's really going to be a long haul to try to get that back. And the people that are left here that can't leave are going to be the ones that suffer.
Right, because the tax base is going to shrink as the people that can leave do so. So now the local government is reliant on people who can least afford the cost of goods and services, government services.
Yeah.
And it becomes, to me, a death spiral, really.
Yeah, we have pockets of more middle class and upper class in South Minneapolis, around the lakes. We have certain businesses that are still here, but once that property tax base dries up, you're looking at schools receiving less funding, which for the bureaucracy is a major blow because they rely on their money to at least tout their graduation rates, which are certainly acceptable, except they're graduating kids at a proficiency of a 5th grade level. So they're pretty much setting them up for failure. So then, you're putting these kids out on the street that aren't prepared for life, don't have any life skills, can't find a job. So what are they going to do? They probably find more solace in the streets than they do in stable employment. So it's pretty dire.
So obviously what they need to do is keep voting for the party that brings all these things to fruition in the first place, right? That makes perfect sense.
Well, the thing is, they use the crutch of systemic racism, so that's always their go-to excuse for their failures.
But at some point, it would seem, railing against the storms here, but it would seem at some point that you look at the who is committing the bulk of the violent crimes, and you say these people can't be white supremacists.
Yeah. But that doesn't get the news headlines. You're not going to get that on CNN.
Right.
See, they love these they just eat up all the they call protests that are with the flames in the background, and it's mostly nonviolent as the shoe stores and the dollar stores go up in flames where people are working and they shop at. So it's the national media and the corporate media love it. They it's their cause.
Well, they establish a narrative that, at least from what I see here in Memphis, they establish a narrative at the national level that is pretty well filtered and carried at the local level as well. Mm-hmm. So that you don't see people talking about which lives matter when a family here is killed. Mm-hmm. Just neighborhood violence, or people like we've had over 36 highway shootings since the first of the year. There's not going to be talk about what lives matter and when that happens. It's only when it's a certain demographic or it's a police-involved thing, then it matters. Otherwise, no, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw I assume you have too, the body cam footage of what happened in this with respect to what happened to Duante Wright. It seemed pretty obvious to me that the officer thought she was deploying her taser. I mean, she vocalized the whole time, I'm deploying taser, taser, taser. My immediate reaction, and it may not be correct, was most likely the more experienced and the senior officers probably hit the bricks last year. They probably left, retired, found apartments elsewhere, and they're gone. And that leaves a smaller workforce, and in many instances a younger and more inexperienced workforce, with an overwhelming problem that's grown worse because the police have been weakened. So they're literally in over their heads trying to deal with this. The officer in question, I believe, had over 25 years or so on the force. So it seems to me it's a training issue. But I don't know. I don't know what happens with this. I mean, you can have all the experience in the world, and you're overwhelmed, and bad things happen. But do you think that that's what it is? That the experience, the bulk of the experienced people have left, and what's left is just really not equipped to deal with the spiraling, escalating violence?
Yeah, I think that's probably just the start of it. I think we've had not just a demoralizing of the police that are there, the hostilities directed towards them at all level, but I think we've had, I think, over 800 plus is the we started at before at the beginning of May last year.
Yeah.
Now we're down 200 plus, and then they defunded the police even more. The mayor didn't get his full budget that he requested. So they have early retirements, people taking leave of absences for mental health reasons. So it's going to be difficult to regain the force needed to bring the city back to the policing that they need in these neighborhoods that are underserved. And they're not going to be able to hire qualified people. Who's going to want to be, if you can find a different job and not be cursed at or leered at or
shot.
And shot. So, and have the governor pretty much throw you under the bus. I don't know if you saw his tweet after Devontae Wright's death, but it was pretty horrendous.
I did. Yeah.
So that was pretty.
We have a
bad
situation now in which narrative transcends facts, and it's not going to change. I think. If I could propose any solution at all, we would take the same number of National Guard troops that are in Washington D.C., protecting the fence over there, and deploy them to Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's funny. The people that cry for defunding the police all live in gated communiges, and they have the means to have their own protection. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile in the city, for example, in George Floyd Square, which I went to a couple of weeks ago, you can walk in there, and residents and business owners can drive in there. They're allowed in by the gatekeepers. But it's overwhelmingly being polled. The people that live there want it open. There's an escalating, concentrated amount of violence in that square, and if a violent attack occurs there, the police and the EMTs aren't allowed in. They have to request the victim to be taken out of the square to be treated.
That's just dumbfounding.
And they can't investigate a crime, so it's pretty much just the Wild West on street violence steroids there. So it's pretty. It's going to be a daunting task.
And the same people. Forgive me for interrupting, but I feel a rant coming on, and I resist. I resist the urge. I resist the urge. But the same people that want to defund the police, that have sections of their cities that are just no man's land, that can't even get to the victims of crime, and aren't going to help the people that are being attacked, are saying, by the way, we're going to make inroads on your right to defend yourself as well.
Yeah, it's
makes perfect sense.
Autonomous zone. Yeah, so it doesn't. It makes no sense.
I didn't know.
They already have a perfect example of what happens when you defund the police, or when you don't allow the police, and yet they want to make that what Minneapolis is.
Yeah. So a senator from Louisiana recently said, "So if they get their way, whenever you're attacked or you fear for your life, somebody shooting at you, call a crackhead, because that's all that's going to be left." Well, all right, that was uplifting. You and your family okay through all this? Y'all hanging in there?
Yeah, we're hanging in there. So my husband works in an office building that should hold about 5,000 people, and he's one of about a dozen that go into work. So
that's quiet.
Yeah, it's quiet, but it doesn't bode well for the
yeah, really,
for the future of the workforce in the Minneapolis
area. And speaking of the future, you guys have an addition to the family. I mean, in addition to all the dogs, right?
Yeah, so
on the way,
instead of another 4, hopefully not 4-legged, but yeah. So I mean, I guess you never know. We would love yes, I'm.
Yeah, just stop that train of thought right there. Just we'll just bring that to a stop.
Yeah, a little baby boy at the end of August.
That's fantastic. I'm still I'm not insisting. I'm in no position to do that, but I would strongly urge you to look at some good Cajun names. Boudreaux.
We need some spice up in Minnesota. Yes.
Yeah. This is my boy Charlie. His name is Boudreaux. That'd be great. That'd be great. Well, thank you again for kind of giving us. I had no idea that it was such a hellhole. George Floyd Square. That's like, I've mentioned this before when I was driving an 18-wheeler cross country, and in any number of cities that I would go through, one of the most violent streets in that city, tragically, it was named after Martin Luther King Jr., who called for nonviolence. Anyway, so you guys stay safe. If you want to get out of there, I know some good parts of the country I can recommend. Okay, and it's not freezing all the time.
Yes, this is.
I saw snow falling during the protest. I'm like, you've got to be kidding! There's snow falling up there still.
Yeah, I mean, we're not out of the woods till the end of May. So when my tulips come up, I know there's one more snowstorm coming. Yeah, so even this week we're supposed to get wintry mix. That's our optimistic term for it.
The summer lasts a week and a half?
Well, and this is good. In southern Minnesota is actually not too bad. People, in Duluth have it. I think what the joke is, Mark Twain said the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer I spent in Duluth. So yeah. I can't complain. At least we get a month. That's pretty good.
Oh, man. All righty. Well, then stay warm and stay safe, please. And thank you again for dropping in and letting us know what's going on.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Dave. Thank you very much for having me.
Always a treat. Always a treat. Folks, that's Jenna Stocker on the Dave Carter program.
Some podcasts shouldn't be tossed aside lightly. They should be thrown with great force. Broadcasting from Memphis, Tennessee, at the intersection of spellbinding conversation and mischievous humor, your host Dave Carter brings you the exceptional audio-visual experience you deserve from podcasts and live stream events. For irresistible analysis, playful laughs, and audaciously good music, it's the Dave Carter Show.
How's that for some audaciously good music, huh? Fun times. Speaking of fun times, have you enjoyed the proceedings here today? It's been huge fun bringing all this to you, and I do hope that you found some things to think about today and some things to laugh about as well. Even if you're laughing at the thinking parts, that's okay. That's all fine. We all need a reason to giggle, whether it's with the host or at the host. That's all good. Now, if you've enjoyed this and are masochistically inclined to want more of it, then I would encourage you to go on over to my little website at davecarteronline.com, where you'll find a video version of this program and a sizable collection of articles that I've written over the years and some other stuff, some of those articles predate even my time at Ricochet. They were written from various places across the globe when I was in the military. There's also a page on the site called The Inkwell. Now, that's where I write more introspective pieces. In fact, I wrote a piece last week or perhaps the week before called The Sum of Our Pet Peeves. It was more of a lecture that I delivered to myself, actually, centering on the unfortunate tendency, on my part at least, to let those things that annoy become the focus of one's thought and attention, you can wind up in a pretty bad, sour place, or with a dour disposition when you do that, particularly if you work with the public, especially if you work with the public in a retail setting, for example. Anyway, you might find that piece interesting, and who knows, you may identify with it to some extent as well. The podcast is doing really, really well. At last count, we are being heard in over 180 cities and towns across the country, and then over 30 countries around the world. And while I'm on that topic, let me invite you also to head on over to iTunes and give us a rating if you like there, a 5-star rating if you'd want, and then leave some comments on what you thought of the program. You can find us on YouTube as well. Subscribe there if you'd like. Just look at Dave Carter over on YouTube, and you can chime into the comments as well on that venue. We're going to try and pick up the pace of the show production here to the extent possible, consistent with the day job. There are a lot of interesting people that I want to get on the program that we're lining up and bring to focus. Well, we've got a rapidly changing situation in our country and in our world, right? And so we want to talk some more about that and bounce some ideas off of you and talk to some interesting people and see what you think about all that stuff. So, as I always say, with thanks to my friend Troy Senik and Ricochet members Jenna Stocker, and with special thanks as always to you, the listener, I am Dave Carter. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Dave Carter Show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a single episode. And while you're there, please leave a review and tell us what you think. And on behalf of all of us at The Dave Carter Show and the Ricochet Audio Network, thank you for listening.